I'm so happy to meet you again, Lindsey Field. Welcome to my Hoof Summer Talk. And it's such a great pleasure and an honor to be able to do this interview with you today.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Will you please, let's just start off with you introducing yourself, where you come from, and how come that you are all into hoofs?
Yeah, so I'm from New Zealand, originally from the UK, so I've got quite a strong English accent, which fools everybody. They think I got hooves because I had my own horse. I was given a horse from a riding school, and he was constantly lame, and I'd had his shoes taken off. He was 22 years old. He was going to be put to sleep, so I took him on. And every time he was trimmed by trimmers, he would be sore for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks he'd be fine. So then I got another trimmer, and it was the same process every time. And I thought, this is crazy. I need to take this more into my own hands, because every time the trimmer would come, I felt like I didn't know what they were doing. I felt really inadequate. I had to put my whole trust in somebody to make my horse fit, keep his feet healthy. But my horse was telling me something different. He was telling me he was sore. And I said to my husband, I'm going to have to learn to trim. I can't do this anymore. And I said, the only way I'm going to be able to do this is really, I need to get some cadaver horses' hooves, and I need to just see how far I can pare everything back until I hit blood. That was my first experiment, so to speak. And my husband got me some cadaver horse hooves, these 4 hooves, which I looked at, and I really didn't understand what I was looking at. And then my husband said, well, why don't you cut them up? Go and use my bandsaw in my shed, which is a great big industrial saw. So he helped me as we sawed these hooves in half. And I looked at them and I thought, well, this is really interesting, but I haven't got a clue what I'm looking at. Honestly, it was like so alien to me. And that's when I started to learn. And this was about 4 years ago now, and I learned everything from those first 4 hooves I had. I researched, I tried to understand everything. I put on a Facebook page, which was my own personal journey. And it was just to share with friends and people from Pony Club, anyone that was interested in what I was doing. It was literally just that type of platform. And then the hoof that we're going to be discussing shortly on this webinar is called Hoof W. And that was the hoof that launched my page into what was 100 people following me and following my journey. I think we're up to 54,000 now.
It's amazing.
And it's amazing. And it happened overnight. And I realised that there was a massive need out there for people, for ordinary people, to understand what was going on. Because I was in that same position. I was a blank page. I knew nothing about the foot. I was new into horses. I'd only just learnt to ride. And I'm looking at this foot thinking it's a piece of wood with nothing inside. I didn't understand. And once I understood, and once I learned and talked to so many people, that I realised, wow, my eyes were opened. And then I realised that ordinary people needed to be able to see this from perspective as somebody that knew nothing. And I think that's why people love what I do, because it comes from a place of, oh, well, what's this? Let's have a look. Let's see. Then I'll go and research it, and then I'll share my findings. I'm a blank page. I've got no preconceived ideas. And I give people what they need and show people the horrors that go on in feet that we have no idea about. And I think it just gives them a better understanding. The things I'd love to talk to you today about is this white line disease, which is my passion. So this is Hoof W, which is a hoof which is very close to my heart. Like I said, this is the one that literally launched everything into people's living rooms, basically. So this was a foot that I actually did a dissection. It was the first one I did where I had a group of people come to watch me and we could talk about the foot. And you can see that there's somebody just sitting there in the background and there's me holding up this foot without a glove. I mean, we're talking about 4 years ago when I was very rudimentary. But this foot is quite incredible. Where you've got your pointer down there, in about the 1 o'clock area, you can see that there's a little indentation in the hoof wall. Now, honestly, that didn't anything at all on the outside, and my eye didn't really get drawn to it. But I decided that we would do a cut straight through that area. There was like a little crack in that area as well, but truthfully, it didn't really mean anything to me. It didn't look of any consequence at all. And this is why I want to show you this foot, because sometimes you look at a foot and you'll see something very small. You do need to investigate. You mustn't ignore it, because it could be hiding something quite awful underneath. And you're always better to investigate. And the best case is that you scrub your foot up with hot soapy water. You have a look at that hole and it's nothing, which is great case. But sometimes you'll look a bit more carefully and you'll dig about a little bit and you'll see that it's actually more than a little hole. It's quite more significant. So let's have a look at the next slide, which will show you where I did my cuts. So it's the other side now, but it is the same area that we were talking about. And you can just about see that there's it divots in at that point. Now, this is a hoof that's already been cut. So although you can see that line going up from that little area of study, that line is my cut mark. But the actual crack itself literally went up probably a centimetre. It was tiny. Now, there is a crack, there is a line down the centre of that foot. And again, that's where my cut mark is, so don't worry about that. But this area of study, which I pointed out to you, look and see what that looks like on the inside of the foot. So here we go. I mean, that is quite astounding, isn't it? Would you have believed that tiny little hole would have been so devastating as what we're seeing here? Now, to get this in proportion, the size of this that you're looking at, talking about probably 3.5 to 4 centimetres up the inside of the hoof wall. So if I can quickly describe to you where we are, we've got the hoof wall that's coming down on the far right hand side. You've got that darkish area, yes, so that's the external hoof wall. And then the inside of that we call the middle part of the hoof wall, which is where this disease loves to feed. And then the inner part of that, which is where the lamina are going to be, you can see there's no disease in there. Oh, there is a little bit, but I'll describe that to you. And then we come down and we've got the sole. If you can point down and show the sole underneath. And then when we go up, we can see, looks like a little animal, really, a little bird with an eye. That is the coffin bone. That's chopped the coffin bone through straight down. So you can see that white line disease is far more extensive than we would ever have imagined by looking on the outside. And it can really fool you. And what happens is that disease, it only gets in if there is a problem with the hoof wall, with the capsule. And when there's a little crack or a little hole or something that appears because of the inadequate trimming or unbalanced trimming or terrain, or it's very wet, or so many reasons, then the bacteria and the fungi, which are already in the environment, can get into that little tiny hole, and then they start to eat their way up the hoof wall. And that's what you're seeing there. And the problem with this is that when you see this, unless you get rid of the seat of the infection, which is right up at the top there, near where you can see my name, that's where it's still growing and eating away. You need to get to that part to kill it. If you just treat the bottom part and ignore that top part, which will be full of horn which has eroded and been eaten, and it's like crumbly. It's almost like dust. If you don't get to that very top part, you will not get rid of the problem. And this is why a lot of people, they say, I've been treating this for months, for years, and there's always a hole. I never get to the end of it. And this is, I believe, the reason why. So although we've got this awful damage inside the hoof wall, which is going to be a mechanical problem for the horse, because you can imagine the horse is incredibly heavy. And as his foot goes down and he rolls over to do the next step, there's going to be a lot of forces on that hoof wall. And what happens is because it's not intact, it's going to prise it apart with every footstep. And then it keeps the problem going. So you start off with a little hole, you get an infection, that carries on, but then you've also got the biomechanical aspects of something wrong with the hoof wall, which is then going to just keep widening and widening. And the other thing with Lyme disease, people say it doesn't hurt the horse. I can assure you it really does. Not in all cases, but I have experience where my horse had white line disease when I first got him. And when I was cleaning out the hole, he was telling me that it hurt. Now, if you think about it, there are no nerves where that damage is, because we are talking about an external part of the foot. But if you go over to that red part where you've got the lamina and we've got sensitive tissue in there and we've got nerves, and nerves are used, part of the function is to transmit pain to the brain. So if you can imagine, you've got this hole here of all this muck full of paddock debris, full of mud and muck, because that's what happens, and it presses and presses, you've got pressure, and that's where you start to get inflammation on the inside of the foot, and that's where you get the pain. So I hope I've explained why this is so important to look at these tiny little holes, not to ignore them, because you could have something like this underneath. And this can be diagnosed with an X-ray. You can actually see it on X-ray because you can see that there's a hole in the hoof wall. And that will tell you how high it goes. But if you have a farrier, some farriers and some trimmers would actually, the method of treating this would be to take away the hoof wall where you've got that damage. And the idea is to submit the bacteria and fungi to oxygen. And it doesn't survive in that environment. It needs to be an environment where there's no oxygen. And so that would treat it. But the problem with that is you're left with a big square or rectangle of hoof wall, which is to let it grow down. And then the thing is you've got to get to, well, why did it happen in the first place? And it only happens if the hoof capsule, the armour of the horse's foot, has been damaged, and we need to stop that in the first place. In a nutshell, I hope that helps.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating and it's so interesting. I have a question. How do you treat white line disease?
It's probably a bit unconventional because I personally don't like to see the hoof wall. It's called resected. It means taken away because A, it's ugly, which is the least of our problems, but B, we're taking away a lot of the mechanical needs of that foot. And quite often, if you take that hoof wall away, you then need to put a shoe on. Now, I'm not against shoes if they're needed, but if you want to remain barefoot, putting a shoe on is the last thing that you're going to want to do. So my personal choice is that I would make sure that that hole is thoroughly investigated. And it's me, sit on a tiny little stool with the foot in my hand while my horse is munching on hay, falling asleep. And he's thinking, oh, here she goes again, looking at my feet. And I get a tool, which is very, very thin, and I try to pull out all of the rubbish. I don't want to push any in more than it is. I try and pull out as much as I can. And then I syringe the hole with water and try and get more rubbish out. And then I'll have another little dig again, but he'll tell me if it's sore and I'll stop. If he starts to say this is sore, I won't do any more. What I'll do is I'll then fill the hole with I just create a mixture of, well, I normally use some apple cider vinegar and water, about 50-50 ratio, because the bacteria and fungi don't like the acidity. And I put a few drops of tea tree oil in that, and probably 2 crystals of copper sulfate, which you can get from your farm stores. You don't need much, and it can be very, you mustn't use too much of that because it can kill tissue, but it's a very good antifungal. And so I actually squirt that into that hole, really quite a lot. And then I get a piece of cotton wool, which I put in my little mixture till it's sopping wet, and I push that up the hole. And I'll do that once a week. I'll go back and I'll pull that cotton wool out, and then I'll do it, and then I'll start my treatment again. And the idea is you need to get the bacteria and the fungi, the insult which is going up that foot, you need to kill it, because if you don't, it's not going to stop. And once it stops eating away at the hoof wall, you need to let your hoof wall grow. And we know it grows at a pretty slow rate, especially in winter. So you need to get that wall down, growing as quickly as you can. And the best thing to do is to keep that cotton wool in there, because what that does is that stops all the rubbish from the paddock going back up in the hole and reinfecting again, because that is where our infection lies. It's in our paddocks, in our stables, wherever our horse goes. And this is bacteria and fungi that are always in the environment. We can't get rid of it, and we probably wouldn't want to. They've probably got a very good role to play in nature, but we don't want them up inside our horse's hoof wall.
No. That's such a great advice. Absolutely. And I hope all of the people that listen to this really take a very, very good look at your horse's hoofs. It is a great pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you a very, very good or nice summer. But I guess is it summer there now?
Oh, we just started winter now.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I'm in Auckland, which is the North Island of New Zealand, and it's semi-tropical, really. Well, they say it is, but I'm always cold. But yes, we're heading into winter now.
Yeah. Well, we're heading to summer, and it's so great.
Oh,
Finally.
yes.
Yeah. So thank you again, and I hope I see you soon.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.